Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. This is exciting. A big part of my job is generally bringing people into the Autodesk Technology Centers and sharing what we do there in person. And so walking through and looking at the machines and looking at what's being made. So there's certainly a big part of what sort of keeps me alive that I'm missing while we're in these COVID times. So it's great to get to connect with a new group of people and talk with you, answer your questions, share some new ideas, discuss. It sounds like I should. I heard some subtle guidance there that we should wrap up on maybe a positive note.
No,
uh,
whatever you think of makes sense, makes sense.
Great. I think we'll get there anyways. No, that
Not
is the goal.
sugarcoating your world. It's not like everything is beautiful and we should not dance and laugh and everything. I think it's good to face all the sides from all the different perspectives.
Yeah. Well, and there's certainly enough going on that that we can get into it. So maybe it makes sense to start with an intro, a little bit about myself personally, and sort of what I'm excited about sharing with all of you. I if I have to summarize into one theme, I would say that so much of my passion is around developing spaces where community supports innovation hands-on. So with machines, with tools, with physical materials, learning, testing, building, experimenting. Those are the spaces where I have thrived, and those are the spaces that I've spent much of my career working on building for other people to come into connection and experiment with how we build our world. So to put this in a little bit of context for my own personal journey, um, I've been through a long path that started with no carpentry skills, moved into some basic carpentry, but then I spent a year in Northern California at one of the few traditional wood craft schools left in North America, learning how to take a piece of wood, turn it into a set of tools, take those tools, and then build furniture with them. And it was an incredible experience, almost meditative. And I set all that up to say that I swung from that end of the spectrum and followed that up by doing my master's in architecture at MIT just a couple years later, which couldn't be further across the spectrum of how things get made. And there I really focused on digital fabrication, digital design tools, things like generative design, CNC equipment. And so swung across that spectrum, and post that have spent my whole career, what I like to think is somewhere in the middle, looking at that intersection of how you go from a 2D drawing, an idea, a sketch, a conversation, into making something in 3D and building the world and testing it out. And so that is the place that that is the most exciting to me. And with that, I joined Autodesk to build out what is now called the Autodesk Technology Center network. And these are spaces where we have a great deal of equipment. We've got robot arms, 3D printers in multi different materials and by different machine manufacturers, wood shop, metal shop, welding, water jets, you name it. If we can't do it, we know somebody else who has the equipment and can. And the goal there, and maybe I should dive into a few slides to give you some background on our technology centers. But I've worked with Autodesk in a number of roles, and so I think part of what I want to share is what it takes to build a truly interesting and innovative space around tools. It isn't so much as just putting the machines in front of people and saying like, have a great time. Because I think, as we know, there are a lot of barriers to having a great time. Some of those are social and cultural. You know, as you might expect, we're all raised in societies that don't necessarily encourage women to pick up tools and have a great time making things. And so that's just, I think, one thread in thinking about how do you make these spaces welcoming, community oriented, not intimidating, but actually inspiring. So I just want to pause right here and say, please interrupt. at any time. Um, I want to speak to what you're interested in and answer your questions along the way. So please don't hesitate. I'll try to pause and check in, but ask what you want to know.
And also, if you feel like you don't want to chime in, you can use the chat. And Laura is having an eye on this and can also kind of find the right spot to say, wait for a quick question. Yes. Great, thank you.
Excellent. So let's see. I'll do a share screen here, and give you. This is our pitch deck, but my goal is to not pitch it, but to give you a sense of what I'm talking about in terms of the Autodesk Technology Centers. Give you the overview. So we are really using these spaces to support a residency program. We have hundreds of teams that come in, and they literally take up residence in our space. What we provide for them are a set of shop techs who know how to run all the equipment and who teach the classes on how to do it. We have workspaces where they get a desk, can sit, they can use the conference rooms, share lunch with all of us, etc. We offer training on all of our machines. It's a la carte. If you want to just learn how to use the water jet, you just sign up for the water jet. Once you take the class, you can run it. Our shop techs do not build things for people. We don't work on contract. We're not hireable, but really we're there as a learning space, and that is a huge component of what makes this successful. Cutting edge community. We bring together folks that we think are asking big questions and doing something interesting with it. The goal here is to have a whole community built around what is the future of architecture, construction, engineering. What is the future of manufacturing? What is the future of design? And we bring people in at whatever time makes sense for them. So whether that's a few weeks or that's a year, rolling admissions, and it's free. Where'd my click go? Another key component of what we're doing is bringing together industry, big corporations, along with academic teams and startups. We think that this mix is not actually happening out there in the real world, and that by bringing those three components together in this space, we're actually creating an opportunity for the kinds of conversations that can push the industries forward. The academic teams are doing fantastic stuff, and yet often they are so out of sync with what is happening in industry. They may or may not be able, the time frames for all of these different sectors is so different. I think the demands are different. The approach is different. We have sites right now in San Francisco, Toronto, and Boston. Why is this not clicking in the right direction? In San Francisco, we have had more of a focus on the future of manufacturing. In Toronto, we've had more of a focus on the future of design, and in Boston on the future of architecture, engineering, construction. That said, each site is a good mix of those themes, and once you're admitted into one site, you have access to all of them. I have a couple examples of resident teams. I'm going to pause the pitch deck there because I think that might be enough sort of background on the Autodesk model. And I want to, so as part of my role in Autodesk, I've also done site visits, for, I don't know, dozens of other innovation spaces. And what I see are some really key factors that first distinguish this type of innovation space from maker spaces and also from incubator spaces. And so I want to draw one vector there. We can talk more about those distinctions and what really, how I define those, or what really changes the character of those spaces. And then the other vector is who's doing this. So I've been to nonprofits that are doing this, trying to support regional economies. I've been to showrooms, but what to me has been a very interesting emerging over the last, I'd say 7 years trend is that a lot of corporations are setting up variations of these innovation spaces in-house, funding them, supporting them, supplying them. And there is a variety of models here. Some of them are all internal employees that can use these innovation spaces. Some are bringing in outside teams. Some really are sort of accelerators, and then they look at doing acquisitions for the ones that are most successful for those internal programs. But it's been a huge uptick over the last 7 years. And I say that because we've given thousands of tours through the SF site. And I can't tell you how many people follow up and say, hey, we want to talk with you more about what kind of equipment list we should purchase to start our own innovation space. And my first response to that always, once we sit down for the conversation, is it really doesn't matter. The equipment doesn't matter at all. What matters are the people and how you develop a community. You could set up an incredible cutting edge space with a laser cutter and a big work table. So your overhead is, around $1,000. You could also do this with $2 million and have incredible robot arms, and you may not actually create an innovative community. You may create a community that goes deep on a particular tech question, but doesn't push the envelope or change the direction of the industry. So where does that get us? Okay, so thinking about how corporations set up these spaces in really different models. I think the other distinctions I want to make here around the maker movement is also around this sort of scale of impact. Does the maker movement as a term mean something to this group? I see a mixed. Okay.
Click the yes and no at the participants panel, and then you get a feeling about the distribution here. So when you click the participants panel in Zoom, there is a yes and no button down there. So just click there so we get a feeling of how much shade should go into the maker community. And if there is no response in the next 3 seconds, then we just give a little. So there is a no. Yeah, give us a little download about the maker community.
Yeah, great. So the maker movement as a name really applies to DIY, do-it-yourself, garage experimentation spirit of, if you want to learn about drones, build one, try it out, do it with your friends, your neighbors, your kids, your family, solder it yourself, get some cheap equipment, do it with cardboard, and you're going to learn a lot. And so much of the maker movement spirit has been around connecting people to tools, and that being an introduction space. That said, there have been some very problematic aspects of the maker movement. There's a magazine called Maker Magazine that has fueled a lot of that connection. And I think that I'm going to get the statistic wrong, but in the first 5 years of the magazine, I think there was only one woman on the cover. It's pretty much a white male movement. However, it sparked a lot of excitement. And certainly, Autodesk took a look at that and said, hey, our software facilitates digitally designing things. Let's connect to the maker movement and see where this is going. And so Autodesk connected with Instructables, which was a big online hub of instructions, how to do this weekend project. And what was fantastic about the maker movement was it generated a huge amount of excitement and a spirit of anybody can be a part of this. And I say anybody with an asterisk on it because, as I mentioned, there were some problematic aspects to this about who actually was, who was signaled to be a part of the maker movement. But it launched something different than what had been happening before, which was a lot of spaces opening up in communities with tools, with people able to go in and take classes at an affordable rate and get access to that and start making things. Something very, very exciting happening there. However, the maker movement did not scale. It really stayed with the weekend project. It didn't look at how do we change how the world is being built. It didn't have enough continuity in those projects, or the way the communities were really built around it, to say, how can we re-engineer a brick to be a more sustainable building material? How can we recycle our own buildings, so that we have a circular economy? How can we look at these really big questions that will actually change what we're doing, and the amount of carbon released in manufacturing or construction? So there were some serious limitations, but the spirit was quite exciting. Um, I want to counter that with a lot of other space. So there are a lot of these maker spaces around the country, and I think globally, I'm not sure if it's caught on as rapidly, but you see college campuses with these spaces particularly, and a lot of access there to machines. The other counterpoint would be incubator spaces. I know in the Bay Area, a lot of these have started up with giving folks access to at least 3D printers, but and accelerator spaces. The focus there has largely been on business model development. So supporting folks with being able to pitch, get funding from VCs, and really engage in Silicon Valley, but use those spaces as a way to prototype something that they might bring to the pitch. But not necessarily sustain them in a way that that brings an innovator through the fabrication process, so that they would have that they would move into production at scale. So they might do some prototypes on a 3D printer. They might not make 80,000 of that, contracting with a manufacturer in China. I would say of all these sort of threads that I've drawn here, we're working on building a space that's really in the middle. We don't offer business model support. We don't offer, access to venture capitalists. We do try and foster the same excitement that we see in the maker movement, the open access, but we're doing a new spin on that. And I think that there's a huge opportunity here to develop these spaces, taking sort of the lessons from this constellation. And I think the biggest that I see is putting community at the forefront. Bringing all those people together and giving them access to each other in a facilitated way that drives collaboration. A lot of those incubator spaces are about protecting intellectual property. People are developing patents. There's a lot of competition. They're often looking at some of the same funding sources. But what we have the opportunity to do is support people in connection, helping to solve problems together, so that the problem is not the intercompetition. The problem is looking at the big picture. This happens at a community level, supporting things like Slack channels, encouraging people to ask questions, connecting people who are working on similar problems. But I would make an argument that a lot of this actually happens at the machine tools as well. I spent the first 5 years with the Autodesk Technology Centers running the shop team. So acquiring equipment, running the technical team that developed all of our curriculum, teaching people to use the machines. And I would say that that first 3.5, 5, 10 seconds that you walk into a workshop, that determines how you feel about what you can accomplish in that space. So if you're greeted by somebody who says, "This is awesome, you're here. What are you thinking about doing? Let me help you with that. Oh, you want to do it on the water jet. Have you considered doing this? Let's talk about the differences of these so you understand." It's very, very simple. But that difference in interaction can actually change how people approach making things and open up the door for considering making things in a more responsible way, a more connected way, and actually have that person walk out with an empowering spirit, an empowering sense of, I can make this thing, and via making that, I can change things in the world too. And we can draw this back to a long line of why do we have art? Why do we need portraits? Why do we have a human impulse to, draw something and see ourselves reflected in that drawing? The same is true with the built environment. We need to see ourselves reflected in the built environment to have that sense of empowerment, I believe, about affecting the built environment. And I think that spark can happen right in the workshop around those tools. and with a team that has that spirit and can approach new innovators in that way, we can really open up a lot of opportunities, a lot of connection, and develop community in that space. I can pause here and see which parts of this so far are most interesting for all of you, what questions you have. If you want to hear about other corporate models or nonprofit models, what I think does or doesn't work for them.
I have one
Oh,
question.
yeah.
Um, so one of the guys that we meet during this tours is into education, Julius Dobosch at Coxwood College. When people come to the college, it's a multimedia college. When people come to the college, the students, and they're really good at Pro Tools or I don't know, Final Cut, whatever software they're using, he forces them to use a different software for a whole year. It doesn't allow them to use that software because he wants them to not to know the software well, but to understand what problems can I solve well, because all the software is available basically using the same software, so, using the same tools or having the same features. How much of what you're helping people understand in your cohorts, how the gear actually functions, can also be more than explaining the mechanics of the infrastructure of the gear, and more into what problem are you actually trying to solve here?
So how do we get people into that? What problem are you trying to solve? Is that the question? Yeah. So a lot of that we choose for in the application process to the residency is folks may submit a very technical application. This is exactly what I'm going to do on this machine, and this is how I want to build my prototype. We really push people to answer for us before we bring them into the residency. What big question are you asking? Or we bring to them, you're proposing this project that is going to leverage a distributed manufacturing process. Let us confirm that that's actually what you're trying to do here. You may be driven to develop this widget, but what we see is that you're developing it in a new model of supply chain or manufacturing. So we do push people on those questions before bringing them in. And we follow that up with our conversations in our community meetings. So we do a weekly hour-and-a-half gathering of the residents at each site. And those are facilitated conversations. And that's also where we push that question and put the big picture forefront.
Okay.
Can you explain maybe on a few examples your difference to a makerspace? Because in our region we started a makerspace, and we see it's very difficult to build up a community because a lot of people are coming and make their own things and go away. So they are
Yep.
not interested to improve the world, for example. No?
Yep. So some of the big differences, I would say a lot of makerspaces work on this like a gym membership model. You kind of pay your monthly thing, you go in, you do your stuff, you head out with your towel at the end. We really are looking at, so for our residency program, we work with folks on their way in to say, what is it that you want to do here? And can you make a commitment to attending the community meetings, being in conversation with people, and whether or not they have sensitive intellectual property? Is there an aspect of this project, their project, that they can share publicly, so that when we walk by their desk, there can be something on their desk that they can share and show? And I know this may sound tangential, but I think that sharing and showing component is actually critical. Because if you can come in, cut all your stuff, take all of your lumber home, build your thing in your backyard, you aren't being forced to connect your project to anyone else's. And so we put a big emphasis on that. And depending on the group, they often they often kind of move their startup or their research group to one of our facilities and stay there for months. So that becomes their de facto office, which is helpful, and I know not available at a lot of maker spaces. Does that answer your question? Would you like some examples of specific projects
That would be nice, yeah.
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 So I can share this. I can jump back into the deck if that's useful. This is a good example of Breeze Automation. They are developing a soft robotic arm using pneumatic controls, and they're looking at underwater applications. So they have this very interesting technology, really innovative. It's a cobot in a way. It's so that you can bump into this robotic arm, and because it's run by pneumatics, it has a great deal of spring, and it's a soft arm instead of a rigid hardware on the outside, so that you can work in collaboration with these arms. There's like a number of aspects here that are really interesting, and then the way they're controlling it is unusual. So when we brought them in, they basically moved in, 4 people, set up all their bins of hardware and junk and whatnot. But we also started connecting them to other teams inside of Autodesk and sharing with them, hey, this is an exciting group that we have our eye on, that's really going through a bunch of rapid iterations on their projects. And ultimately, we connected them to some of the teams doing research, internal employee teams at Autodesk doing research, and help them draw the parallels to how they could both benefit from one another's investigations. So this is an example of a team that we're able to sort of take to the next level with the corporate support, and by virtue of being in this larger environment. Some other examples. Let me see who's next in this deck here. Yeah, okay, so ADDO Tech, they're working on large scale 3D printing for construction in concrete. And is this, I believe this is the group that we saw some of their technology overlapping in interests with other current residents who are looking at bringing innovation to their construction companies. We also supported them in the NASA 3D printed habitat challenge. But by virtue of connecting companies to each other inside of the residency, so curating relationships, we've also helped form sort of partnerships and coalitions of groups so that we might have an architect, a technologist, and a construction company all looking at potentials in 3D printing at scale, and working together and connecting around how they might partner on a specific project coming out of it. So there's a big difference here, I think, in also the scale of where maker movement work is focused and where we're bringing in residents that are corporations.
If you are talking about residents, what does it mean exactly? The people are staying for a long term there, and they get the completely support of your company too. So it's a kind of sponsorship, or what is it?
No money exchanging. They don't pay us, we don't pay them. It's free. And companies can come in from anywhere from a few weeks to a year or more. They make an application with a specific project in mind. It might be a sprint project, or it might be a really long development project. We encourage people to come in with a project that looks like it would be 6 months, to start with something that's manageable, and then see if that develops into something bigger and longer, and to see if our model is a good fit for how they want to develop it. It's open-ended. Yeah. And I will say that, we get a lot of questions about the finance part, internally and externally. How can Autodesk afford to do this? Isn't this just sort of throwing money to the wind? Why would they pour millions of dollars into building out these facilities to offer a program for free? The truth is that our research department inside of Autodesk, around 10,000 employees globally. Our research department is a few hundred people. We have capacity in the residency program to bring in, I think, around 2,000 individuals a year. So we are an engine of volume, and we give the company this portal into what are people thinking about and what are they testing around the future of these industries. And we don't pay them, they don't pay us. We don't have any stake in the game. They can come through, but if there is a great connection, it's hugely valuable to the company. If it ports in and makes plugs into our research division on something they're currently working on, fantastic. Maybe it's a case study that we want to track and see where it goes. We really are like we're a fire hose compared to what else is happening in the company around innovation. And it's a huge benefit to the teams that come in and get to use the equipment in the space and connect to one another.
I think it's also the spirit, if you want to raise the ships, you have to elevate the water.
So, do you mind? So
yeah.
I'm trying to get tangibly where this might work. So I'm doing a little bit of work in some of the Micronesian, Polynesian island atolls. So rising sea level, some are disappearing. Chinese very keen to expand their territory across the Pacific. US really concerned about it, so is Australia and New Zealand. The population, which is about 100,000 spread across 40 odd islands, is really keen to develop a sustainable business or operation. Is this a sort of thing where if a bunch of them got together and say, hey, look, let's explore in your spaces how we can start looking at creating 3D printing operational methodologies of avoiding having to import lots of finished product, and so exporting money, and bringing in raw material and doing something with it, maybe even with the coral which surrounds us,
yeah.
and printing sea walls or something like that. Is this the sort of thing which might be something which could work and end up in a project, or is this
100%.
way too far off?
Oh, absolutely. Please join. I want to connect you to the team we've been working with at California College of the Arts for the last 6 years. They're called Buoyant Ecologies. They've been running architectural studios and marine research out of the technology center, looking at floating structures for the Maldives. They recently did a collaboration with involving the former president of the Maldives, and in collaboration with a university there, developing these floating extensions of the city grid that look at how to mitigate ocean level rise, how to use those structures for capturing, fish or kelp or whatever else they might be harvesting, but also doing research with some scientists who are marine biologists and working in architecture around generative geographies or geometries, to look at, can you develop a geometry on the underside of your hull that actually would support native species? So they put an experiment into the port, into the SF Bay at the Port of Oakland, looking at, depending on the aperture of the holes, you can support different fish laying eggs, different concave shapes, or ridges will support different types of kelp and underwater growth. It's just a fascinating vein of research. It's been very inspiring. So, what we support covers a huge range, and I kind of go into that detail because, throw us your wild ideas.
Jay, let me just for a moment. You became super animated then.
Oh yeah.
So is this a sort of way that it can work? You quite like. Now I'm going to take this one a little bit further. I hope people don't mind. I want to take it a little bit further. So the people we're working with are not technically aware that any of this stuff exists.
Mhm.
So are you able to take, say, a group of 10, 20 people who are not politicians probably, but pretty a cross section, and help them actually get to a point where it can become a real project? Or do you need to have people who got some prior knowledge and prior skills?
So we really are, we are the infrastructure of support. We don't drive these projects. So while we can make connections to the group at California College of the Arts, we can connect them to the folks at Benthic Labs, and we can support them with developing their prototypes on the 3D printers, with learning the design software that they might need to use, and how to tweak that inside of generative design to test out all these different geometries. We don't drive the project. We wouldn't suggest, like, you have to have a kind of geometry on your hull that supports XYZ. But we'd be there in step to support them as they ask those questions and help facilitate a connection to, you know, McMaster Carr and, you know, to Bosch and to whoever else they might need to work with. Yep.
I got it.
Does that?
I
Yep.
got it. I think I get there. That's really great. It's really interesting. I'm sure Simon will be seriously excited about what can be done with some of the kids which Moonshot Pirates are working with globally, who all got some really good sustainable goals in mind and have got some really wacky, or at least I think a lot of people say, well, that's crazy. But if you can pull it off, it'll be fantastic. And to get them across that hump, you know, of a lot of well-educated adults looking at them and saying, you're just kids. This is over to you, Simon.
Two things. One comment on the makers movement. I wasn't aware of it, but now that you explain it to us, I see it everywhere. There are makers places all over Austria, for instance. There's a makers fair where I actually went, and now I know a little bit more where the motivation of each project came from. So this is really interesting to see. I also know that Martin mentioned one maker space in Carinthia. I've heard of it. A lot of funding was put in. The idea is great, but it seems like that they have a problem of building a sustainable community. And now I'm getting back to what you said, Marcus. So we are an international youth initiative that helps young people to develop their own ideas, dreams, focus on an SDG and SDGs and technology, and then make the world better. So we use it as a vehicle so that they learn about it, but at the same time, we also want them then to actually turn it into action. It's the actual mean is to learn about it, to know it's possible. But if the more actually turn it into action, the more interesting it becomes. So yeah, I'm also thinking about how to implement that new knowledge into the initiative.
I've worked on a few different youth programs over the years. If we go way back, I used to, before podcasts became a thing, I used to work on an after-school queer youth radio program. And it was really about getting young LGBTQ people out to tell stories that they felt reflected themselves in the media. That was the fundamental goal, because there was almost no information about queer youth, and they were suffering quite a lot. And another program I worked on maybe 10 years ago was with high school students, so age, I don't know, 15 to 18, 14 to 18, with an introduction to architecture. And they had to propose an installation somewhere in their neighborhood, and then we built it. And it was a 6-week program, 8 weeks. The parallel for me in both of those was this same sort of philosophical idea that we need to see ourselves reflected in the world around us. And for those teenagers, that was fundamental to both of those programs. Was in the architecture program, these young people did not feel like they had control over the world they lived in. They just didn't have many rights and access to much. But to be able to think of something, design it, and then build it and interact with it, walk by it and tell people I made that, it just represented like a huge shift for them. And I'm sure, there are a number of educators on this call, this thing. I'm sure you have more articulate ways to talk about it. But that is so valuable. And that is what we can do with these shops is open up that same opportunity, for adults in the prototyping process for developing their hardware to go into manufacturing as well. But I think what I've learned in working in these innovation spaces, I think applies whether people are young or old, whatnot, but that how you introduce folks to these hands-on fabrication tools makes a huge difference in what it unlocks. There's a great experiment in the Bay Area led by Emily Pillaton called Girls Garage. I encourage you to take a look at her organization, and she has a very lively Instagram feed. But her space is built around empowering young women with tools. And she's super inspirational, fantastic. She's written a few books. I encourage you to check her out if you don't already have her on your radar when thinking about young people and tools.
I have another question. How many spaces do you have now?
Right now, I think we have 180 teams in residence.
Yeah, and how many spaces?
Yeah, totally variable. Some of those teams, right now we're looking at, it's all online programming. All of our shops are closed for COVID. So we have a huge opportunity to bring in teams that are virtual, and especially to bring in teams that are not near one of our technology centers. That said, when our shops are open, some of those teams only come in a couple days a month. Some of those teams sit at their desk every single day and they become colleagues. It really depends on what the commitment is from the group. And so in that way, our capacity really fluctuates. Oh yeah, great. You sent the LinkedIn for Emily. Hopefully she doesn't mind that I'm sending a bunch of people her way. But, I'm sure she wouldn't. She's fantastic. Yeah. Simon, when you're talking about your program with young people, are you talking about hands-on and physical fabrication spaces, or?
It's also a part of it. We're actually building a whole community around it where people who want the hands-on approach join, and then they either go to a boot camp where they learn how to develop their idea. But it doesn't need, so there's also a lot of prototyping, but it can be also a concept that can be then implemented in a different way. So it's a community where we have workshops, a festival, a lot of online content like talks, webinars, and online mentoring. So the idea is to have a mentor for everyone. And maybe to finish the stories, it's built on 3 pillars. So one is moonshot thinking, personal development, you're aware of it. Second is exponential technologies. And the third one is understanding the global challenges, the sustainable development goals, and then use this knowledge to do something better for the world.
Sounds very exciting. Are all of the participants in Austria?
So we started in Austria, and also our headquarters is in Austria, but we're right now becoming international, and also so the online programs have been, for instance, the last competition, we challenge that we launched. Had 850 participants from 30 plus countries, so it's getting more and more international. Actually, on July 1st, we are doing the online pitch night where the 7 best teams are presenting their ideas. And Jody, who was the speaker just before you, she's also in the jury and will then appoint one of the teams. So this is one of the things we are doing. But so the boot camps in Q4 are starting to pop up in many international cities across the world, and right now we are focusing on that.
And the winning team will be in Silicon Valley, so we might knock on your physical door and say, "Hey, show us around."
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
One question: how much do you think is it important that Pier 9 is separated from One Market Street or from the other Autodesk buildings?
That's a complicated question. I would say that, so I joined Pier 9 when we were under construction, and nobody really knew why we were building it and what would happen with it. And it was a sort of a pet project of the then CEO, Carl Bass, and a couple of directors who thought this could play into something great and we'll figure it out. The spirit of Pier 9, I'd say for the first 4 or 5 years, was like a startup. And it was absolutely essential that we were disconnected from the corporation in a number of ways, including physically distant. They didn't really know what we were doing. People didn't really care. We were small. We got off and running. And the stories that came out of the Pier started to shape how the brand talked about the Autodesk company. They started to be the images that showed up on 40-foot banners at Autodesk University. It started to be the background imagery in the CEO's talks. I mean, we started to see the implications of what we did all over the place, and it had a lot of energy. And it was totally critical that we didn't start as part of the brand team, a dedicated project where we knew what the goals were going to be. We needed to start in that kind of Wild West environment. I will say that to scale the impact of what we're doing, it's been very important that we become more and more connected with the sort of corporate engines to look at how do we not do this just for the splash and dash, but how do we have an impact on the industries? And for that, we need to be connected to the bigger engines and connected to the larger customer entities and in discussion with brand and a partner with the Autodesk Foundation. And I'd say for that, we have anchored ourselves in a very different way. And in many ways, we have made an evolution from a focus on the maker movement, the home of Instructables. And we have, over that 7 years now, focused on the future of these industries. With a lot of work, I think we're doing that successfully. We see some indicators of that. And now we are very connected to the headquarters at One Market.